I mean, I have a piece of fossil wood in my office that's been carbon dated. I think it's coming out of the ice age at, 11,000 years ago.
Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Kristoff. On this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Yeah, it's really just a forum for people to exchange ideas, come on, talk about their work. What we're talking about here doesn't reflect the opinions of the sponsors or anything like that. We're just talking about what we do and what we love. Today's episode is with Trisha Hook. Trisha Hook is a climate change impact technician with the Government of Canada for Natural Resources Canada. And so she's out there regularly taking samples from trees and counting those rings. Now, it sounds simple. You're thinking, oh, she counts tree rings, whatever, right? It's like, no. This is a whole thing. The things that you can determine from counting tree rings is absolutely insane. It is one of the most crucial aspects of apparently, so I've been told, of archaeological findings of dating things. They use tree rings to truth carbon dating, radiocarbon dating, and that kind of stuff. You can determine if there was fires. You can determine when there was droughts. You can determine whether or not there was people living there. You can determine whether or not there was defoliation in the trees. You can determine whether the temperatures are changing. All kinds of crazy stuff that you can find out just from studying tree rings, right? So it's not as simple as just counting the number of rings and saying that's how old it is. And then you can start cross-referencing these trees to go older and older and older and older and older. And I'm sure they go back hundreds, if not thousands of years that they can date this stuff back. It's really, really cool. And so anyways, brought Trisha on. We wanted to talk about her work, and her work is specifically about a lot of stuff around aspen in the boreal forest and how that's responding to climate change and that kind of stuff. So and defoliation and fires and that kind of stuff. So it was really neat. You guys are going to love it. She's really awesome. She's very passionate about her work, and it was a great conversation. So sponsors for this episode, sponsors for 2020 is West Fraser is the number one sponsor for 2020. They are providing funding through the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, and I couldn't be more thankful for their support. It's really important to me. Thank you, guys. Also, Greenlink Forestry is another sponsor. They've been with me since the beginning, and they're doing great work in the forest industry as well. Again, couldn't thank them enough for their support. Wouldn't be possible without them. And Damage Timber is also a supporter of the podcast. They support environmental sciences through the sale of stuff that they sell. 10% of everything they sell goes towards a scholarship for environmental sciences, and you guys can hook that up by checking them out. They got hats and toques, and looking into some other new stuff coming up soon too. So make sure to keep up to date. Anyways, that's about it. Let's get into it. Not messing around. Talking about dendrochronology with Trisha Hook. Here we go. So I guess first of all, we should just, if you could, just get you to introduce yourself, your name, and then what you do.
Hi, Trisha Hook from the Canadian Forest Service. I'm a senior dendrochronologist at the Northern Forestry Centre.
And how did you get into dendrochronology? And we'll get into what that is after.
I did a undergrad in botany here in Edmonton and just sort of fell into the position.
That's how it always happens, hey? Just kind of, you're into nature and then you fall into something else. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like yeah.
Yeah, I was in insect biogeography and just opportunity came and just
took it.
Yeah, it just happened.
That's awesome.
They were looking for someone who had knowledge in tree rings, and
yeah,
there's not that many people out there.
Yeah, surprisingly. Yeah, it's. So how did you initially, when you were a kid and stuff like that, how did you get into thinking you wanted to get into environmental sciences? What drove you into that area?
Well, I think it was in my second year of university when they dropped a cat on my lap in the laboratory, and I said, no. I wanted to work with the plants, not the animals.
Gotcha. That's funny. That's awesome. So you were just doing biology at that point?
I was just doing biology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Awesome. Okay. And then, so we should talk about what is dendrochronology.
Dendrochronology is the study of tree rings.
So we should talk about, I guess, why do tree rings form? What is a tree ring exactly?
Every year when a tree starts growing, it puts on an annual ring in the northern forests.
Mm-hmm. So why is that though? Like, what's causing the rings to appear?
So as the tree starts growing in the spring, they put on very large, thin-walled rings.
Okay.
And they drop those cells drop lots of water really quick.
Okay.
So the trees have lots of water to drop into the canopy.
Mm-hmm.
Then as the season goes on, they put on very small, thick-walled rings. Mm. And that's what causes the line every year.
Okay.
And then as the season goes on, those cells get smaller and smaller and smaller. Mm-hmm. And that's how every year you can see that line in the tree.
So it's almost like, it's the early wood, late wood kind of thing. So the line is actually the slower growing end of the season growth. So it looks really dark because it's really dense and close together.
Yeah, really teeny.
Yeah.
Thick-walled cells. Yeah.
Okay. So that's that typically tells us that that's 1 year growth because the light stuff is the spring and then the dark stuff is the later in the season. Yeah. That's the idea?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Do all trees grow rings like that, or is it only in like temperate climates where we have that, that fall, winter kind of breakup?
Yes. Yeah. Tropical trees don't put on a reliable ring.
Okay.
You might get a wet season, dry season, sort of a tree ring look, but you need to have that distinct seasonal change.
So it's the season that's causing it. It's not like a certain species of tree puts on rings and other ones don't. It's like they all grow more or less the same, but if the season changes are drastic, that causes a differentiation in the growth.
Yeah, it's like winter, summer.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So then what do you know when we found out like who figured out tree rings and like how to like what they meant and that kind of stuff? Do you know the origin of all that?
Actually, I have no idea.
No. I looked it up a little while ago, and it was an archaeologist at the beginning of the 20th century, I think it was, and I forget the details of it, but it was interesting. It's one of the oldest, I guess, methods of they called it true dating for archaeology and that kind of stuff. So it was interesting.
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't really know. It was an archaeologist, not a plant person, I guess.
Oh yeah, it's used extensively in archaeology, dating settlements and expansions. Tree ring is used a lot in archaeology. Mm-hmm. You can time wars, and because when you have droughts and people, the food source deteriorates while people move, settlements move with food supplies and everything else. And so by seeing the patterns of droughts.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you, so you're talking about droughts and how you can measure out those droughts and that kind of stuff. So how does tree rings relate to, like, we know that the cold and, the actual seasonal changes, but as far as the climate, like the amount of rain or the amount of, sun or water or whatever, all that kind of stuff, how does that relate to tree ring growth? Like, how can you tell if, there was a drought or there was a flood or there was whatever? How does that work?
So wide rings are formed in years where there's good growing conditions, when there's lots of sunlight, lots of water. Mm-hmm. Narrow rings are formed in years with poor growing conditions, where there's not enough water.
Gotcha.
So it's a direct relationship. Just
to water, or is there more involved in that as well?
Well, there can be.
Okay.
You can bring insects and everything else, but directly you look at the tree ring histories, and if it's a wide ring, good growing conditions; narrow ring, poor growing conditions.
Okay, as simple as that. And then as far as what those conditions are can be more complicated to suss out, but
water is the major driving
factor. That's
factor.
the major one? Okay, that's cool. So what kind of things can you suss out from just studying tree rings besides just the age of a tree and drought?
pretty much a complete medical record is stored
Really?
within the trees. You can see insects, disease outbreaks, drought history, the frequency and duration, fire. Of course,
right.
you get the fire scars in the trees.
So if a tree went through a fire and survived, didn't die out, you would see an actual, like a charred line
Yeah.
from, okay.
And if there was a lot of trees, you can see stand dynamics. If a lot of trees died around it, and you can see the release.
Yeah.
That suddenly that tree has more sunlight. You can see, oh, suddenly that tree is growing better.
Okay.
You can see slope movement, avalanches.
Oh, yeah. How does that work?
When trees tilt,
Tilt. Oh.
you get
okay.
a gravitational response in the tree rings.
So what does that look like?
You get a darker ring. You get reaction wood that forms.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how do you differentiate that between, like, how do you know that was like a slope that moved as opposed to, I don't know, like a longer late season growth or something?
The ring just looks different.
It has its own signature.
It has its own signature.
Huh. That's pretty cool.
And what's really interesting is angiosperms and gymnosperms with slope movement react completely different.
Can you explain those real quick, the difference between the two?
Yeah, angiosperms have tension wood and they react on the upside of the slope.
Okay.
And gymnosperms react on the downside of the slope to gravity.
Okay, so what give me an example of an angiosperm and what was the other one?
Gymnosperm.
Gymnosperm.
So
okay.
the cone trees.
The cone trees are
versus
gymnosperm?
the flower trees.
Oh, okay.
So their reaction wood is downslope.
The cone trees is gymnosperm, you said.
Yeah.
And theirs is downslope.
Yeah, so their reaction wood is, so they respond to the gravitational forces downslope.
Okay, by supporting the base, and then the flowered trees, so like aspen and balsam poplar, now they actually start to like
respond upslope. So they try to pull the tree upward.
Gotcha.
And gymnosperms try to push it
okay
back upslope.
Okay. Is there, when you guys are looking into building up your laboratory and all that kind of stuff with all of these different types of trees and that, is there a specific, is one better than the other for dating or for telling certain things, or are they all kind of good, just slightly different?
Well, it depends on the story you want to tell.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, fire history, of course, conifers are great because fire history is in the conifer forest.
Okay, yeah. Just more likely to burn in a conifer forest than a deciduous forest.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like to work on aspen.
Okay.
Because they respond actually very clearly to climate. They're a short-lived species, and it actually paints a very clear climate picture.
I suppose that's true, hey, because they are very, yeah, they're the first thing to pop up after a disturbance, right? Because they grow fast and they grow quick, and they just try to put it on, and yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So focusing on aspen, so that you said the climate thing is the big one that you can get from aspen, and like what other things can you get from that?
The defoliation history is one of the big things that we get from aspen. Mm-hmm. How long the outbreak has been, and then the frequency of outbreaks. The neat thing about aspen is you get these white rings that form. So we went into the forest and we're like, hey, what's with these white rings? And we went and we picked up all the leaves off the trees at different percentages. Yeah. And at 80% is when you get these low density white rings that form.
So 80% of crown closure, like
of the leaves being eaten off by caterpillar.
Being defoliated. Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay. That's you get this white ring.
Yeah.
Okay. And what causes that?
Like forest tank caterpillar.
Or what
large
causes the white ring? I mean, like what's the
They're a non-lignified ring. So
okay.
They're a cellulose ring. And they're really low density. You can like go and scoop them out with your fingernail.
Oh.
So they really affect the wood fiber quality.
Oh, okay. I see. That's weird.
Yeah, they're really neat. And it was something sort of fairly new.
Yeah.
And they're super cool. And so so if no one's in the forest to say, hey, we had defoliation here or defoliation there, we can go back and say, hey, there was defoliation in this forest.
Oh, that's awesome.
And say, well, we're having more defoliation than we historically had, or we're having less defoliation. And we've discovered, we never had defoliation in this area, but now it's moving further north.
Mm.
So forest tent caterpillar or large aspen tortrix is moving further north into Northwest Territories.
Really? Than historically.
Than historical
baseline that we know of. That's cool. So it's really like it's pretty amazing how detailed of it. It's really just telling the story of the boreal forest, like a detailed history of the whole thing, right?
Yeah. So if you don't have climate stations or someone in there to record it,
yeah,
all that information's in the tree rings.
That's awesome. It's really it's so how long have we been collecting this type of data? Like, because you're working for Environment Canada, correct?
Natural Resources
Canada.
Yeah.
Sorry. But so because you guys have, last time I was there, you guys have a massive library of cookies in that, right? Mm-hmm. So how many is it cores, like from an increment board, or do you have actual slabs? You have slabs, I think, right?
We keep most of the cores.
Okay,
we don't tend to keep the cookies.
Okay. I guess we should probably quickly explain what an increment bore is for people that don't know. So an increment bore is how we age trees without cutting down the tree, basically, right? So a increment bore is this long, hollow drill bit that we can drill into the tree by hand. And because it's hollow, when you're drilling it into the tree, this little cylindrical piece of wood goes into that hollow space. So while the increment bore is still in the tree, we slide this thin metal insert under that piece of wood that's in the hollow space, and we actually pull that insert out with the wood still on it. So that gives us this very clean edge cylindrical piece of wood that we can really easily, read the rings on. So that's how we do it without actually cutting down the tree and doing it that way. And so how many samples do you guys have there?
Oh, gee. Probably 10,000.
10,000?
Oh.
And does every province in Canada have their own thing, or is it all go to here?
Oh, there's several different libraries across Canada.
So we've probably got tens of thousands of examples of tree rings and across the whole. So can you get a pretty vivid picture of like how, how the boreal forest has changed in the last, I don't know, like how far back can you look into history to like using this method?
Well, you can use live trees and cross-date them with dead trees.
Oh, so you can cross-date them.
Oh yeah.
So if you have a live tree and you find a stump in the bush and you don't know when it was cut down or when it was burnt or whatever, you can actually figure out when that was by cross-dating by trying to match up the different types of rings, like the ring pattern.
Yeah. So you take your live trees and you take your dead trees and just graphically match up the patterns and see where they overlap.
That's awesome.
So you can go back hundreds of years.
Huh. That's really cool. So how far back have we been able to do within Canada, do you think?
Oh, coastally.
I guess coastally.
Coastally, yeah. Quite far.
Like what's the oldest tree in Canada that they've cored? Do you know?
Oh, I think it goes back to like the 15 or 1400s at least.
Yeah, so 500 years.
They'll take samples from old longhouses and coastal villages and such. And
yeah, that's an interesting point. Like I wonder how long, like those old cedar stumps that have been, cut down, say 100 years ago or whatever, even further than that. I'm sure a lot of them are still sticking around, right? Like they hold on for a long, long time. Has there been work to look into those old stumps that and cross dating those with and trying to get back as far as possible?
Oh, yeah, there's people doing that sort of work. I don't do that sort of work, but
that's cool though.
I mean, I have a piece of fossil wood in my office that's been carbon dated. I think it's coming out of the ice age at 11,000 years ago.
That's awesome. That's where did you find that?
It was given to me. It came by Rob, Alberta.
Oh.
Yeah.
What is that? Rob, I don't know.
By the town of Rob.
By the town of Rob, Alberta.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I was like, Rob. Rob, Alberta? That's a guy? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good last name.
Yeah. So, there's people that are working, paleontologists that work, and they create long historical records.
So they can go back quite a ways then, hey? Mm-hmm. That's cool. Has anybody ever done, what's that, like the oldest tree on the planet? It's in California.
The bristlecone pine.
The bristlecone pine. Now, what's that? Methuselah.
Yes.
Methuselah, it's called, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Has anybody ever, I know there's been samples taken of nearby trees, And then do you know the story of the...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The University of Arizona. They have a whole lab that is dedicated to that. Yeah.
So that whole, that forest, I'm assuming, is probably a lot of
intensely studied.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know the story of that? I remember hearing, I don't remember the name of it, but there was another tree that they thought was older. And there was some master's student, a grad student or something like that was out there doing destructive sampling. And they'd cut down this tree. And it wasn't until after because they couldn't, I guess he couldn't get the increment bore in. It was too dense to push into the wood, right? She's like, I guess we'll just do a destructive sampling, cut it down. This was in the 50s, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I remember that story, yeah.
Yeah, and he cut it down, they counted the rings, and it turned out to be the oldest tree in the world by like 70 years or something like that. That guy, I looked up, there was media articles about him. He had death threats, and for decades, people were after him, right?
Yeah.
But then it was close. I think it was in the same forest as the Methuselah tree, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very, very cool. Like, I wonder, so as far as you know, we'll get back to what you know in a second.
Yeah.
I know we're going off base a bit. Do you know about has anyone ever taken those cores and tried to map out, like, do the same thing that you're doing with that stuff? I'm assuming?
Yeah. Like I said, there's a whole laboratory, and I think they have, over 70 grad students. And there's hundreds of people that work through that laboratory.
That's very cool. Does that, do we ever, when it comes to dendrochronology or whatever, this science, is there collaboration cross-border? Like, does Canada collaborate with the United States and you guys?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of that going on. Because the natural disturbances don't care about where the border is, right? They're just, so that must be like a pretty common thing that you guys have to do to sort things out.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Is there like a giant database somewhere?
Oh, there is. Yeah.
There's
the International Tree Ring Database.
Ah, there you go.
And we all submit to that. And then in Canada, we're working on developing sort of a national tree ring database where researchers where we're putting our data in.
Yep. So
forest managers and stuff have easier access to what projects have been done and who's done what, so they can have easier access to it all. Yeah.
That's really cool. That's super cool. I had one other thing I was thinking about before we get into more detailed stuff. And it was, you know that there's that aspen clone, I think in Colorado.
Oh, the largest organism in the world.
Yeah. And it's called Pando, I think. It's an aspen clone anyways. And so for people that don't know, it's aspen grows, correct me if I say something wrong because you're the expert here, but it grows from the roots. And so when the stem is cut down, the genetic line is still like alive so it's basically just it's not, I can't say it like that, but it's almost like a fruiting body just popping up is the actual stem. And the root system itself, they estimate to be like 80,000 years old or some craziness.
I don't remember the numbers on that, but they say it's just huge, massive.
It's ridiculous. How would they date something like that?
I have no idea.
It's wild. Like because like the root systems, do they have rings the same as trees?
The root system does have. It
would have rings?
Has rings, but the rings wouldn't be 80,000 years old. They must use some sort of carbon dating or
I was going to say,
sort of extrapolation of some sort too.
Yeah, like how would you count 80,000? Yeah, like it's, I don't know. I'd be curious to know how they actually sorted that out. But that's the oldest, I think it's the oldest living organism that we know of or something like that. Or is it the largest?
Well, I think it's the largest.
Oh, the largest because it just covers the most amount of area. It's one giant clone of however many hundreds of thousands of trees probably. But they're all the same genetic individual.
Makeup. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Anyways, moving on. I got a sidetrack there.
It's the largest organism.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so getting back into specifically like the stuff that you've been working on, right? The aspen and working on climate and defoliation and all that kind of stuff. So what kind of trend have you guys been finding when you do these specifically on aspen, I suppose, in regards to how the climate is changing or how the boreal forest is changing, period?
So in the late 90s, forest managers were coming to us and saying, hey, what's going on in the forest? We're seeing a lot of dieback. Mm-hmm. And so we established a large project of 150 research sites across Western Canada. Okay. We start to go into the forest and do health and take core samples and everything else. And since then, since about 2000, we've had drought across the boreal forest and aspen parkland.
Huh.
So almost continuously.
So like as an average compared to the
historical past.
Historical baseline. And that's based on the dendrochronology.
Just based on weather records.
Just weather records. Okay.
And we've seen a huge amount of forest decline and forest dieback. We've had massive pockets, massive amounts of aspen dieback.
Okay. In any specific areas in Canada, or is it?
Oh, just through Western Canada,
Western
through
Canada.
Through Alberta and Saskatchewan, especially.
Okay, so like in the parkland where the kind of edge of the aspen lives, it's moving. It's actually moving kind of northward and dying back, or what?
Well, so that is what we're looking at.
Okay.
So, we had 3 years of massive amount of extreme droughts in 2002, 2009, and 2015.
Okay.
Like they were extreme droughts.
Something we don't have historical record of. Like it's like outside. Is it within the norm of natural variation, or do we know that?
Well, it's just such a long, severe period. That you had the dirty 30s and stuff, but
sure.
This is more northern.
Okay.
And so now we're revisiting these sites this summer, and we want to see how the forest is recovering.
Okay.
Because our last visit in 2016, we didn't see a lot of regeneration, whereas aspen is usually pretty quick.
Yeah.
So we're very curious to see when we revisit these sites this summer what has happened.
Right, especially considering it doesn't have to germinate. It's just popping up from the roots. Right, so it has a lot of resources on command. It can just, one stem is cut down, another one, okay, my turn, and it pops up all of a sudden, right? But it's not like a spruce tree or pine or something where it needs to germinate from seed and needs perfect climatic conditions just to germinate at all, right? Or has to worry about getting eaten by a bird or something like that, right? So
so that was sort of what was sort of unusual about our visit in 2016.
Yeah.
That we weren't seeing a lot of regen, and aspen's usually so quick. So we only visited every 5 years, and so we're quite curious to see what happens this summer when we go back.
Yeah. So is this, where are your sites? Are they mostly in the parkland, or are they all throughout the boreal?
They're in the interface.
The interface.
Yeah.
It's right where the agriculture land or the plains meets the parkland kind of thing.
Well, the boreal aspen. Aspen parkland boreal interface.
So, okay. So like between the central mixedwood and the parkland kind of thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So. I see. So how would you measure, how could you explain that dieback, like in relation to where the boreal forest and like parkland would normally be compared to where it is now? Like how severe is that dieback, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, when you flew across the landscape, it looked like there was a massive fire.
Oh, it just from, they're just dying out.
Yeah, so when we...
And there was no fire?
There was no fire.
So was it from defoliation that they...
No, it was just drought-induced dieback.
Just from drought. They were just, wow. And then they're not coming back the next year as far as... I guess you find that out this year.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's... is that something we have? I think I asked you this already, but I'll ask it again just to make sure. Is that something we have historical record of happening in the past? Besides, like you said, like the dirty 30, like in the 30s, did this happen? What I'm asking, is this something that's unprecedented?
As far as we know, it is.
As far as we know.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are we contributing that to for the most part? Is it climate change, like increase in temperatures and that kind of stuff? Or is that still something we're sorting out?
Well, that's always a tricky question to answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of change going on in the forest, and we do attribute it to climate change. Right?
So that's a.
Temperatures are increasing across the forest landscape. So
there was a really interesting website I just looked up yesterday that I got was what was it? Like Climate Atlas or something like that, or it was some kind of predictive model where you could click on like precipitation or temperature or cold days, hot days, freezing days, and that kind of stuff. And it was showing the difference between 1970 and today, and then the predicted amount based off of a certain amount of climate change, whatever, up until 2080, I think it was. And it's fascinating to look at the differences and how that's all changed. So it's definitely something that's Like what's the average, do you remember what the average change is across the boreal forest as far as like mean annual temperature?
It's 2 degrees.
2 degrees already.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the thresholds that we wanted to keep the world the mean annual temperature below, right? Was between under 2 degrees.
Yeah, I believe it's 2 degrees.
Yeah. Are we at that yet? Do you know?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Globally? It's getting close though, right?
Not globally. No, definitely not globally.
Definitely not globally? Oh, okay.
Yeah, as you go further north, the change is, of course, more severe, right?
Yeah, it's more drastic as you go up.
Yeah.
Okay. So the northern hemispheres, or just the northern hemisphere, but the northern ranges of the planet are seeing the most severe amount of this change, right? Like
like permafrost thawing and things like that. Right?
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense. So how does all that relate to, like, what other things that you guys can see while studying the tree rings that, for example, we talked about the drought, and so what other things are being impacted by like the change in climate that you guys can see in the tree rings?
Things like permafrost thaw.
You can see that?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, because the forests start to fall over.
Oh.
So you get...
so not an aspen, probably. This is being like black spruce or something?
Black spruce.
Okay.
So you get we call it the drunken forest effect. So you get the trees are falling over in a bunch of different directions and such, and that is recorded in the tree rings as well.
Same way that it would be if a slope was to move or something like
exactly,
that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we're taking samples from all over. How do you guys collect your samples? How does that work?
So we have partnerships with the province that assist us, and they collect samples, and with the territories.
Okay.
So
yeah, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's I was just thinking, there's so much out there. There's so many people out there in the forest, taking tree cores and that kind of stuff. And so if you could tap into that resource, I imagine there's probably more data like in tree cores cord per year in Canada than you could possibly ever get through in a year. It'd probably build up.
Yeah. I have to restrict the projects.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can have too much data. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's funny trying to, like, it's interesting that you like doing aspen so much. So what is it about the aspen that drives you? Why do you like doing those as much more than conifers or whatever?
Well, I mean, when I started working on it, no one said it could be done.
Oh, there you go.
So there was my challenge.
And it is hard. Like, I mean, we have to core trees here because we do vegetation inventories. So it's green link. So we have to do cores all the time. And I try to avoid doing aspen unless we have to, because it's if there's another tree we can do that'll give us a good age, we'll do that, because the aspen is just hard to age, right? Those rings are so close in color, right? I've gotten good at it now. Now I use my phone.
Oh, there's a method. Yeah, there's a method. Come talk to me.
Yeah, I have to learn it for sure.
Yeah.
Well, because we usually always do it in the bush too, because we're trying to learn. No, you
can't do it in the bush.
It's not. It's hard. It's really hard in the bush. Yeah.
No, you have to polish it really fine, and then it comes clear. But it's such a good record of drought, defoliation. It just responds so well to climate. You can graph it so clearly with drought. Yeah. With the climate. So you take, the climate moisture indices, and and it just reflects it so clearly, and so you can see. The insect outbreaks and the drought, and then even things like earthworm signals.
Earthworms aren't a native species, though.
No, there's invasive earthworms.
Oh, okay. And the boreal.
Yeah. And so you get earthworms that will move in and they'll compact the soil, and there will actually be a signal in the tree rings.
What does that signal look like?
It's just a decrease in growth that can't be attributed to anything else. So when you remove everything else, there can be an earthworm signal.
It's ridiculous how much you can learn from that. Hey, just by looking at we have tree rings here. Just looking at that, you can probably tell like the whole story of everything that happened, right? Like so is it a method of? Is a lot of it a method of just kind of going through the list, like say, okay, is it drought? No. Is it this? No. Is it this? Or is it literally you can look at it and like that's a specific signal for this, and it's, you know what I mean? Like I'm wondering how difficult it is to read these. Is it something? Is it?
I mean, it's a process. I mean, you have to prepare them.
Yes.
perfect.
How do you polish the aspen anyways? Because it's not like the cores are massive. It's not like it's a broom handle, right? They're these tiny little.
Well, you mount them.
Oh, okay.
And we make our own special core board, and you glue them down, dry them. Then you sand them. We use like to a polish, like furniture polish.
Just by hand?
No, with a belt sander.
The belt sander, okay.
And then like 3,000 grit sandpaper.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's perfect.
You're sanding it with glass.
Oh, a glass finish. And then we scan them.
Okay.
And it takes, 10 minutes to scan one sample.
Oh, very, very detailed.
Very detailed.
So like along that line, so you're getting these really, really fine details. How many, like in an average year, let's say, or I don't know, this is a bad question. I don't know why I've been asking it, but I'm going to try it anyways. How many, cellular layers are in like a growth ring?
You could have like one cell.
You could.
Yeah.
So it's not uniform. It's not like the cell. It's so if you have a good growth year, you're going to have more cell layers. And if you have a bad growth year, you're going to have less.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You could have a ring that's one cell wide. Like
that's a tough one to measure.
I mean, we measure them to, 1/1000th, a thousandth of a millimeter, right?
That's okay.
So, I mean, that's how. So
yeah, is that done by hand or is that like? I mean, obviously with microscope and stuff.
Oh no, we don't use the microscope.
Okay,
it's all digitally.
It's all digitally done. Oh, yeah. Okay, very cool.
And so by graphing it and detrending and bring in the climate data and then picking everything apart, you can get a complete representation as to what's going on.
That's very, very cool. So what other things, like outside of aspen and that kind of stuff, what are like certain species of conifer or even different species of deciduous, like birch or whatever, are they better for different things?
Yeah, well, birch.
What's wrong with birch?
Birch is awful to work with.
You gave me a really ugly face there.
Yeah. Oh, you say it. Aspen was hard to work with. Birch, I find birch is hard.
So why is birch so difficult to work with?
Its rings are just so faint and...
Oh, okay. Yeah, hard to see. Okay.
Different species, they respond to different things. So when I'm working with in a new area or a different species, I'll bring in different climate data and I'll play with it. I'm like, okay, I'll bring in moisture. I'll bring in soil moisture. I'll bring in temperature.
Yeah.
I'll try growing season and I'll see which of those variables the tree rings best match up with.
Oh, okay.
When I graph them.
I see.
To see which is the driver.
So where you're really getting this information is by the cross.
Yeah.
Cross whatever.
Because graphically, they'll line up.
That's incredible.
Just perfectly. And so you see, okay, well, that tree is driven from, April through September moisture. It's not really driven through temperature. Or it's like I'm finding in some northern trees.
Yep.
It's actually, nighttime temperature.
Oh.
That is.
How can you tell that it's nighttime? How does that work? Like, how do you find that detail? Like, how do you know it's like?
Because I bring in all the variables.
So what's the like mechanism that allows you to know it's the nighttime temperature?
Well, because it's actually the permafrost thawing that's actually driving the growth.
Okay.
And so, so it's all these different variables. And so it helps you paint the picture as to what causes these trees to grow and develop these patterns.
That's wild. So as the boreal forest as a whole, what kind of trend are we seeing in general across the boreal forest in regards to like the reaction to climate change using like the method that you guys use?
Well, I mean, it varies from species to, there's areas that are showing a decrease.
Decrease in growth?
And productivity. White spruce has really suddenly been decreasing over the last 15 years.
Decreasing?
Yeah, decreasing in growth. Of course, there's areas that are growing great because that's the thing about drought.
Right.
You get, one summer, this area gets a couple of good rain showers and that's all it needs.
Sure.
Right? So drought is patchy.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So, but across the boreal, there's a lot of decrease in growth, a lot of dieback.
That's attributed mostly to drought, do you figure?
There's a lot of drought effects, okay. Yeah. And then but as you go up, into some of the northern areas,
Yeah.
you're getting an increase in growth and productivity. So
Just an increase in growing season, probably.
yeah, increase in available moisture, perhaps.
Oh, okay.
So it's, depends on where you are, time and place.
Variable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's what you would expect, I suppose, right? Like it's not like the climate is changing uniformly across everywhere. It's very dependent on which ecoregion you're in, and yeah, it's changing everything, right? The rain, the growing season, like one of the things I saw on that website that I was talking about, I wish I could remember the name, but yeah, I was saying that the growing season now has increased by like a week on each year. In certain places, as an average across like Canada, I think. I'm sure there's places where it's gone up 2 weeks on each year. I said a week on each end of the seasons. I mean, right? So it's adding, which is a huge amount for a tree. That's, you know what I mean? If it only gets like, if you're up in Northwest Territories and you only get 4 weeks of growing season before the frost comes back in, then an extra 2 weeks, that's significant.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that you would be seeing more growth and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I got some samples from the Mackenzie Delta.
Okay.
And I was so surprised that they had massive rings in these trees.
Huh.
So they brought me these trees and like, oh, these are going to be, so far up north. These are going to be so hard to pick through. And these trees had massive recent growth.
Yeah. That's crazy. That's cool. So what about the, like one really big one is like pine beetle, right? So how does pine beetle, how does that work into this equation with dendrochronology?
Oh, well, it just killed everything.
It just kills everything. So can you tell if a tree has got pine beetle? Like obviously you can tell from the fungus that it survived, right? The fungus that comes off the beetle.
Yeah.
But of course.
I mean, we don't really do a lot of work with the pine beetle stuff. And yeah, I mean, we do a lot of fire scar work. Mm-hmm. But yeah, not a lot of pine beetle work unless people want us to, date outbreak.
When?
So what year did this tree die? What year did that tree die? Mm-hmm. If they want to map outbreak, but
sure.
Beyond that,
I guess. Can you? Was there any findings? Like, did this method of study help determine pine beetle outbreaks? So like the fact that this was, it coming across the Rockies and making it into Alberta in a big way. We know that was kind of unprecedented up until very recent years, like the last 30 years or whatever it was. Did dendrochronology help in that sense, or is that just something that we just never saw it here before? So we didn't do any work on that. I mean, people were just on the ground and there was eyes. Like, hey, look, a pine beetle.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And you were talking about fire scars a bunch more. Is there any work to look, like if you walk through the boreal forest, you're always finding old scarred out logs, right? That are or a stump or something like that. And because they've been charred and burned, they stay like that for a long, long time. I'm sure they can, like you said, in the coastal BC, I'm sure they could be hundreds of years old probably, right? Is there work to do extraction from those to try and get more information from those like historical trees? Because they could have been burnt out hundreds of years ago. They could maybe go back extra. Is that something that happens?
Oh yeah. There's always been a fire history program.
Yeah. No.
When I started, a long time ago, mm-hmm. I did a lot of fire history work, reconstructing fire history up in the Yukon.
Okay.
And the fire group is now doing a big project up in the Northwest Territories, reconstructing the fire history there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a fascinating... I understand why not a lot of people go into it, because people like to go, tree rings, great, okay, whatever. And it's like it's not like a crazy sexy idea, right? But then when you start to look into it and the story that it can tell and what you can learn from it, like it's awesome. Like it's really, really, it's crucial to like scientific discovery, really, right?
Well, they're surprised as to how many scars some of these trees have.
Right. They're
like, oh, gee, there's 7-8 scars in some of these trees.
Yeah. I imagine probably like a lot of like spruce trees and that kind of stuff just surviving through those fires for whatever reason. Yeah. Pine trees, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very cool. Yeah. It's such a, like every time when I was looking up before we sat down and I was doing a little bit of research, it was very evident that like the archaeological community in general was very, very adamant that this is one of the main main methods besides radiocarbon dating, right? That of dating stuff, and that it's been used for a long, long time, and totally crucial in a lot of huge archaeological discoveries, right? So, have you been involved in like any of that kind of stuff?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Yeah,
it's super fascinating. I wouldn't be adverse to it.
Right.
Because it's cool.
Yeah. Like my thought was like if you you're going out into the middle of the bush or whatever, and you find an old cabin that no one had ever found before or whatever, right? It could be dilapidated and falling apart, or maybe it's just the base left, or a burial ground or something like that, or whatever, just some kind of structure that's human made, clearly old. So you could definitely extract a sample from that, take it back, and figure out when that was built, probably, like when that tree was cut down, when it was. Yeah,
I mean it's totally doable.
Yeah. It's not something that.
I mean, I did some work with one of the professors at the University of Alberta doing logging history in Jasper National Park years ago. It was interesting.
Was that with Peter?
Yeah, Peter Murphy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had Peter on a couple times.
Yeah.
We talked about the Great Fire of 1919, his big project there, and then just kind of did a rundown of forestry in Canada and all that kind of stuff. So he's awesome.
Yeah.
I love Peter. Awesome. So how does like radiocarbon dating? Do you know much about that? Like how does that relate to this?
Well, they often use tree rings to anchor radiocarbon dating because tree rings are so accurate. So they'll take a tree ring and they'll test the radiocarbon dating to make sure it's accurate.
So they'll use it as like a reference to make sure it's good to go. Okay. Because the radiocarbon dating has to do with like half-life of carbon, correct? I can't remember the...
Yeah. I just know they use tree rings to validate radiocarbon.
That's fascinating that it's so accurate. Like, because you hear stuff about like trees can get false rings and that kind of stuff. How do you suss that stuff out? Like, first of all, I guess, how does a false ring form? And then how do you know it's a false ring and not a... Yeah.
So false rings are often formed when there is like an early, like it gets suddenly cold in August and then it warms up again. So the trees sort of shut down for a little bit and warm up, or an early frost or a late spring frost or something like that.
Oh, okay.
And so the cells get really small and then the tree starts to grow again. But when you look under the microscope, the cells, they look different. You don't get the same cell borders that you normally would under a normal tree ring circumstance. Okay. Yeah.
Can the computer suss that out too now? Or is that something, because you were saying that most of the dating now is done digitally.
Oh, right? we still.
Oh, you're still doing it manually?
Oh, we're still doing manually, but yeah.
Okay, so it's not a computer that's not automated.
Oh, no.
I was going to say, it sounds like it's one of those things that's more of an art than
There is a lot of art and inference and everything else with it. But the cells look different.
Gotcha.
You get a lot of cell rupture when you get a frost and things like that. When you have resin ducts in conifers and stuff, the cells don't form. They form differently around the resin ducts in a false ring than they do in a true ring. So there's keys in the cell formation on a false ring than on a true ring.
Gotcha.
So if you know what to look for, you can tease it out.
Yeah.
And then also when you graph, so you have your tree that you're like, okay, I know this tree is correct.
Yeah.
And then you graph that tree growth against all your other trees. And when they don't line up, well, you know something's wrong.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. I'm really excited to see what you guys are going to find out like this summer, as far as, because you're going to try and figure out how much of that aspen's popping back up, right?
Yeah.
What do you guys suspect? Like let's speculate a little bit.
Well, when I visited a couple of years ago just to collect litter traps and stuff, there was so much hazelnut and there was so much shrub growth that I suspect that it's just choking the trees out.
Yeah, that hazelnut comes in thick. Hey? Like it's wild. You get 7 feet tall, and there's no sunlight getting through to the bottom.
Yeah, so I think the shrub layer is just taking over.
So that's what you think it is, eh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, even in our closed canopy forest stands, the shrub layer is just so much thicker than it ever used to be. That it's impenetrable to walk through that forest.
Yeah.
I mean, you think now you understand why it took the settlers so long
No kidding.
to make progress through the forest.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that has to do with like fire suppression and not having, regular small fires going through. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As opposed to being a climate problem. I'm sure it's a two-pronged thing, but I would think that from my understanding of talking to a lot of different researchers regarding the fire suppression and indigenous burning and that kind of stuff, that's probably had a big role in that, right? Like,
yeah.
So it's, yeah.
But we've had some of our stands, we've had fires go right around them and not go through them. And I'm always like, go burn those shrubs, make my travel easier, and it's like,
it's just so moist that it just,
it's just so moist. And that shrub layer is just so thick.
It is pretty fascinating to watch, like with my job, looking at aerial photography after a fire or something like that, right? You can just see where everything's just been blackened by a fire, and then it just goes around the aspen and poplar and stuff, and you can see where it's hit the understory layer a little bit, and a lot of times it just kind of goes into the understory layer, a few hundred meters, and kind of fizzles out and dies there, but it's still flying through the black spruce and everything else on the sides, right? Like it really plays into even in the springtime when you have no. Like it's really dry, right? It's crazy drought. Yeah. There's still those aspen stands, those deciduous stands are holding on to it, right?
Yeah. So that shrub layer is just so thick. Mm-hmm. I think it may potentially be really inhibiting the regeneration. Mm-hmm. But I don't have a reason for that.
No, it's just whatever. Yeah. What about like aspen in the bore, like in the central mixed wood or that kind of stuff? Not so much the dry mixed wood. I would assume with like longer growing periods, are we seeing more growth in those places?
We've had a few stands that have very suddenly just broken up and fallen apart in the last couple of years.
So it's very variable then. It just depends on the site.
Yeah.
So there's no overall conclusion that you can say, well, aspen's going to do worse, spruce is going to do better, or whatever. It's just kind of depends.
Yeah. We've had some sites around Grand Prairie that just suddenly collapsed and fell apart, and it was kind of out of the blue and a surprise.
Yeah. It's fascinating trying to map out climate change and its effects and how to prepare for it, right? How do we change the way we do things to be ready for this wild shift in? Because I mean, already you talk to people in the industry, right? And they're already having problems with access and all kinds of different things because of the frost not coming in or coming in later or whatever, right? Like if you talk to those people, they'll tell you now that we're already seeing those impacts, and especially the scientists, obviously, right? Yeah. But if you can get the practitioner to notice it, then you know that it's really like it's on the move, right?
Yeah.
Gets you worried for sure.
Yeah. Well, I can, the information that I collect and provide, I can give it to policymakers and forest managers to help them make new policy and manage the forests in a different way.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of that?
Upon request, yeah.
Yeah, upon request. Oh, okay. Yeah. So people want to get a hold of you, they can do that?
They do, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to put your email out on here?
I'm on the web.
Okay, just look it up, Trisha Hook. Yeah. at NRCan or whatever it is. Yeah. Awesome. Well, this is awesome. Is there any interesting little factoids or anything you wanted to finish off with just to group the whole thing together? Anything, just a finisher. You don't have to. If you don't, just say no, and we're good. And we can end it.
Well, now you put me on the spot, and the brain goes blank, right?
I know. I should really start preparing people for this question and be like, "Hey, what's your final thought?"
Tree rings are more than just ages.
Yeah, isn't that truth? Awesome. Well, this is great. Thanks a lot, man. This is great. Thanks. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed that, learning about dendrochronology and how to count trees, the stories trees can tell us. It's pretty awesome. I really enjoyed it. It's obvious that, that study is a lot more than meets the eye. So, that's about it, guys. Thanks a lot for listening. Make sure to rate and review. Tell a friend. It really helps me out. I would really appreciate if you guys told somebody and shared it on social media, whatever you got going on. That'd be great. And, take it easy, guys. See you next time.